Welcome to the final episode of our Achaemenid Empire series on Historia Grapheus channel. If you haven't seen the previous parts, links are in the description to get you caught up. While you're checking that out, please subscribe to the channel, and you'll also find our book recommendations for today's topics there. And now, let's start the history. The long reign of Artaxerxes II commenced in 404 BCE upon the death of his father Darius II. Spanning nearly half a century until 358 BCE, this period was marked by significant internal strife and the gradual erosion of the central authority that held the vast empire together. Artaxerxes' accession was immediately challenged by his ambitious younger brother, Cyrus the Younger. According to Greek sources, particularly Plutarch, who drew heavily on the contemporary court physician Ctesias, Cyrus was the favoured son of their powerful mother, Parysatis, Darius II's half-sister. Parysatis reportedly attempted to persuade the dying Darius II to name Cyrus heir, arguing that Cyrus had been born after Darius ascended the throne, whereas Artaxerxes was born before. While modern historians doubt the claim that the succession was truly open, as Artaxerxes was the elder son and likely designated heir apparent, Parysatis' preference for Cyrus fueled the ensuing conflict. Plutarch also recounts a dramatic but historically uncertain tale of Cyrus attempting to assassinate Artaxerxes during the latter's coronation ceremony at the ancient capital of Pasargadae. The alleged plot, supposedly revealed by the satrap Tissaphernes, was thwarted, but Cyrus was spared execution through the intervention of Parysatis and sent back to his governorship in western Anatolia. Whether the assassination attempt occurred or not, Cyrus soon began preparations to seize the throne by force. Using his position as satrap and commander in Asia Minor, and leveraging a dispute with Tissaphernes as pretext, he assembled a formidable army. Crucially, this force included a large contingent of Greek mercenaries, famously known as the 10,000, though their actual number was likely closer to 13,000. These mercenaries, many veterans of the Peloponnesian War seeking employment, were recruited under the command of the experienced Spartan general Clearchus, with Sparta offering tacit support to Cyrus. Cyrus marched his army eastward from Sardis in the spring of 401 BCE, initially concealing his true objective of overthrowing his brother. The inevitable clash between the brothers occurred in the late summer of 401 BCE on the plains of Cunaxa, located on the left bank of the Euphrates River north of Babylon. Artaxerxes II, warned by Tissaphernes, had hastily gathered a large royal army, reportedly numbering around 30,000 or more, significantly outnumbering Cyrus's force of 20,000 to 30,000. Artaxerxes possessed a marked superiority in cavalry, fielding around 6,000 horsemen compared to Cyrus's 2,600. Some Greek accounts, notably Xenophon's, give vastly inflated numbers for Artaxerxes' army, up to 900,000, likely exaggerating the odds faced by the Greeks. Cyrus deployed his forces strategically, placing his elite Greek hoplites under Clearchus on the crucial right flank, opposite the Persian left wing. His intention was for the disciplined Greeks to break the opposing line, creating an opportunity for Cyrus himself, positioned with his bodyguard of 600 cavalry in the center, to make a decisive charge against Artaxerxes. There remains historical debate, fueled by Xenophon's account, regarding whether Cyrus explicitly ordered Clearchus to swing inward towards the king's center after breaking the flank, an order Clearchus seemingly disregarded. As the battle commenced, the Greek mercenaries performed exactly as Cyrus had hoped. Their disciplined phalanx advanced and routed the Persian left wing before even coming within effective arrow range, suffering minimal casualties. Seeing this success, Cyrus seized the moment and charged directly at his brother's position in the center. In the ensuing melee, Cyrus managed to wound Artaxerxes, but, exposing himself in his eagerness, was struck down and killed, possibly by a Carian soldier named Mithridates. Cyrus's death instantly nullified the Greeks' tactical success. While the mercenaries had won their engagement, the leader of the rebellion was dead, and the rest of Cyrus's Asiatic troops were routed, their camp plundered. The Battle of Conquests thus ended with Artaxerxes II victorious, his throne secured, but the conflict highlighted a critical dynamic: the demonstrable superiority of Greek heavy infantry over standard Persian troops on the battlefield, yet the dependence of strategic outcomes on leadership and political objectives. The Greeks won the fight, but lost the war because their patron was slain, leaving them isolated deep within hostile territory. The aftermath of Conquests left the Greek mercenaries, the 10,000, in an extremely perilous situation. Victorious on their flank, but leaderless and stranded thousands of miles from home in the heart of the Persian Empire, surrounded by enemies. Initially, they offered the throne to Cyrus's Persian ally Darius, who refused. Lacking royal blood, they then entered into negotiations with Tissaphernes, the satrap loyal to Artaxerxes II. Tissaphernes, unable to defeat the heavily armed Greeks by frontal assault, feigned cooperation, supplying them with food and promising safe passage home. However, under the guise of a diplomatic feast, he treacherously seized the Greek generals, including Clearchus, Menon, and others, who were subsequently sent to Artaxerxes and executed. This betrayal left the 10,000 leaderless and demoralized, but not broken. Demonstrating remarkable resilience and organization, the soldiers elected new commanders, among them the Athenian Xenophon, who would later immortalize their journey in his work, the Anabasis. Functioning as a marching republic, they resolved to fight their way home. Their subsequent journey, known as the March of the 10,000, was an epic ordeal covering between 1,500 and 3,100 miles. They marched northwards, up the Tigris River Valley, through the formidable terrain of Mesopotamia, the mountains of Corduan, and the harsh highlands of Armenia. Throughout their trek, they faced constant harassment from Persian forces, attacks by hostile local tribes like the Carduchians and Armenians, severe winter weather, snow-blocked passes, starvation, and the challenges of crossing major rivers like the Tigris and Euphrates. Xenophon's leadership and tactical ingenuity were crucial for survival. He organized effective rearguards, utilized light troops and archers to counter skirmishers, employed flanking maneuvers, and even resorted to devastating the traversed lands to deny resources to pursuers. After months of hardship, in the spring of 400 BCE, the surviving mercenaries finally reached the Greek colonies on the coast of the Black Sea at Trapezus, modern Trabzon. Their joyous cry upon sighting the sea, "Thalata! Thalata! The sea!" became legendary, symbolizing their hope of return. Their journey was not yet over, as they continued westwards by land and sea, eventually finding service with Seuthes II of Thrace before being recruited into the army of the Spartan general Thibron. The significance of the March of the 10,000 extended far beyond the adventure itself. Xenophon's Anabasis, a gripping first-hand account written in clear prose, became a classic of Greek literature and a staple for students learning Greek. More importantly, the successful retreat of a relatively small Greek force from the heart of the Persian Empire dramatically exposed the empire's internal vulnerabilities. It demonstrated that disciplined Greek hoplites could penetrate deep into Persian territory, overcome significant obstacles, and return largely intact, suggesting the Persian military, particularly away from the direct control of the king, was not invincible. This revelation profoundly impacted Greek perceptions of Persian power and directly inspired future Greek ambitions against the empire, notably influencing the plans of Philip II of Macedon and his son Alexander the Great. The expedition also soured relations between Sparta, which had supported Cyrus, and Artaxerxes II, leading to further conflict. Thus, the Anabasis served not only as a historical narrative, but also as a form of propaganda highlighting Greek superiority, and effectively, as a detailed intelligence report on the Persian interior, its geography, peoples, and military limitations that would inform Greek strategy for decades to come. Artaxerxes II's reign was further destabilized by numerous and widespread revolts by powerful satraps, particularly in the western provinces of Anatolia. During the 360s BCE, this period of insurrection is often termed the Great Satraps' Revolt. Several prominent satraps were involved, though their revolts were often sequential and lacked central coordination. The motivations for these revolts were diverse, ranging from personal grievances and court intrigue to ambition and a desire for greater autonomy. The satraps often acted like independent monarchs, raising their own armies, frequently employing Greek mercenaries, issuing coinage, fortifying their territories, and conducting independent foreign policy, seeking alliances with Greek states and with rebellious Egypt. Despite the widespread nature of the unrest, the Great Satraps' Revolt ultimately failed to overthrow Artaxerxes II, or fundamentally break the empire apart at this stage. Its collapse was primarily due to the lack of unity and deep-seated mutual distrust among the satraps themselves. This disunity led to a series of betrayals that Artaxerxes skillfully exploited. Artaxerxes was betrayed by his own son, Mithridates, and crucified. Datames, after surviving numerous assassination attempts by the king, was eventually lured into a trap and killed by the same Mithridates, who had pretended to be his ally. Orontes secured his own pardon by betraying his fellow rebels to the king. Autophrodates and Mausolus were also eventually reconciled with the crown. Although the revolt was suppressed, it starkly revealed the declining authority of the great king and the dangerous level of power concentrated in the hands of provincial governors. The satraps' ability to act independently, wage war, and forge alliances underscored a significant trend towards decentralization. The revolt was less a coordinated bid for the imperial throne and more a symptom of the empire's underlying structural fragility. An over-reliance on powerful regional magnates whose loyalty proved conditional when central control weakened. The ease with which betrayals occurred further suggests a weakening of ideological cohesion among the Persian elite, prioritizing personal gain over imperial unity. Perhaps the most significant and lasting blow to the Achaemenid Empire during Artaxerxes II's reign was the definitive loss of Egypt. Egypt had initially broken away around the time of Artaxerxes' accession, taking advantage of the dynastic struggle with Cyrus under the leadership of Amyrtius, founder of the short-lived 28th dynasty. After further dynastic changes in Egypt, Nectanebo I seized the throne around 380 BCE, founding the 30th dynasty, the last native Egyptian ruling house. Artaxerxes II made determined efforts to reconquer the strategically vital and wealthy Nile Valley. An initial attempt between 385 and 383 BCE failed. A more significant invasion was launched around 373 BCE. This expedition was led by the experienced Persian general Anabasis, supported by a large fleet and a substantial force of Greek mercenaries commanded by the Athenian general Iphicrates. However, this major effort also ended in failure. Nectanebo I mounted a strong defense. The Persians were unable to take the key fortress of Pelusium at the eastern edge of the delta. Although they found another entry point, disagreements reportedly broke out between the Persian commander Pharnabazus and the Greek general Iphicrates over strategy, leading to hesitation and delays. This allowed Nectanebo time to reinforce his position. Finally, the annual inundation of the Nile River turned the delta into a swamp, forcing the Persian army to withdraw. The failure of the 373 BCE invasion proved decisive. Egypt secured its independence, which it would maintain for several decades until the reign of Artaxerxes III. The permanent loss of this rich province was a major strategic and economic setback for the Achaemenid Empire. It starkly symbolized the waning military power of the Great King, and undoubtedly encouraged the satrapal revolts that erupted shortly thereafter in Asia Minor. Egypt's successful defiance served as a clear indicator of the empire's fluctuating military capabilities and internal cohesion. Its loss was not merely territorial, but a significant blow to imperial prestige and resources, contributing directly to the climate of rebellion elsewhere in the empire under Artaxerxes II. Following the long and troubled reign of Artaxerxes II, his son Ochus ascended the throne in 358 BCE, taking the regnal name Artaxerxes III. Determined to reverse the decline and fragmentation that had characterized his father's rule, Artaxerxes III embarked on a ruthless campaign of reconsolidation, employing brutal methods to restore central authority and imperial borders. While achieving notable successes, particularly the reconquest of Egypt, his reign was marked by cruelty that ultimately sowed the seeds for renewed instability upon his death. Artaxerxes III's path to the throne was paved with blood. Even before the death of his aged father, Ochus, the fourth son, had actively maneuvered against his elder brothers. The designated heir, Darius, was executed for allegedly plotting against Artaxerxes II. Another brother, Ariaspes, was driven to suicide through Ochus's intrigues. And even an illegitimate but favoured half-brother, Arsames, was assassinated at Ochus's instigation. Upon securing the throne in 358 BCE, Artaxerxes III moved swiftly and brutally to eliminate any potential future rivals. He ordered a general massacre of his relatives, with ancient sources claiming over 80 members of the royal family, both male and female, were put to death. This policy of terror characterized his reign and earned him a reputation for cruelty, though also for energy and decisiveness. A key element of his consolidation strategy was to curb the power of the regional satraps, whose independence had grown significantly under his father. In 356 BCE, he issued a decree ordering all satraps, particularly in western Anatolia, to disband their private mercenary armies. This was a direct response to the troubles caused by satrapal forces during the Great Satraps Revolt and earlier conflicts like Cyrus the Younger's rebellion. While most complied, the satrap Artabazus II of Hellespontine Phrygia resisted and revolted. Seeking aid from Athens and Thebes, Artaxerxes III dispatched loyal satraps, including Tithraustes, Autophradates, and Mausolus, to crush the rebellion. Despite some initial success, Artabazus was eventually defeated around 354-53 BCE and forced to flee to the court of Philip II of Macedon. By suppressing such defiance, Artaxerxes III reasserted the primacy of central authority over powerful regional governors. A major objective for Artaxerxes III was the recovery of Egypt, lost definitively during his father's reign. His first attempt, around 351 or 350 BCE, proved unsuccessful. The forces of Pharaoh Nectanebo II, aided by Greek mercenary commanders like Diophantus of Athens and Lamius of Sparta, repelled the Persian invasion. This failure had repercussions, emboldening other regions on the empire's western fringe, notably Phoenicia and Cyprus, to revolt against Persian rule. Enraged by these setbacks, Artaxerxes III prepared a massive counteroffensive. He first dealt ruthlessly with the Phoenician rebellion. Commanding the satraps of Syria and Cilicia to invade, their initial efforts were repulsed by Tennis, who was aided by 4,000 Greek mercenaries sent from Egypt under the command of Mentor of Rhodes. However, Artaxerxes III then personally led a huge imperial army against Sidon around 345 BCE. Faced with overwhelming force, King Tennis and Mentor of Rhodes betrayed the city. Despite the betrayal, Artaxerxes had Tennis executed. Sidon was brutally destroyed, with sources claiming hundreds of citizens were impaled even after surrendering. And the city was ultimately set ablaze, resulting in immense loss of life. Mentor of Rhodes, however, was pardoned and taken into Persian service, becoming a key commander. The Cypriot revolt was also suppressed, possibly by Idrius of Caria. With Phoenicia and Cyprus subdued, Artaxerxes III turned his full attention back to Egypt. After years of meticulous preparation, he launched a second large-scale invasion around 343 BCE. Some sources suggest 340 to 339 BCE. He personally commanded the expedition, which included a powerful fleet and numerous Greek mercenaries from Thebes, Argos, and Asia Minor, alongside key commanders like the turncoat mentor of Rhodes and the influential court eunuch Bagoas. This time, the invasion was successful. Despite initial resistance at Pelusium, the Persian forces, possibly aided by treachery or superior strategy, overcame the Egyptian defenses. Key cities like Bubastis surrendered. Pharaoh Nectanebo II, seeing his forces demoralized and the Nile opened to the Persian fleet, lost heart, abandoned Memphis, and fled south into Nubia, ending the last native Egyptian dynasty. Artaxerxes III's reconquest was reportedly marked by extreme brutality. Sources claim he demolished the walls of major cities, plundered temples extensively, imposed heavy tribute, and persecuted the native religion, possibly even killing the sacred Apis bull himself. Although this last act might be Egyptian propaganda designed to vilify the conqueror, Egypt was firmly brought back under Persian control, organized as a satrapy, and would remain so until Alexander's arrival a decade later. While the reconquest of Egypt and the suppression of revolts temporarily restored imperial prestige and borders, the methods employed by Artaxerxes III were built on fear and coercion, rather than genuine administrative reform or the fostering of loyalty. His success stemmed from ruthless military force, but this approach likely deepened resentment among subject peoples and within the Persian elite, creating a brittle empire susceptible to fracture once his iron grip was removed. Artaxerxes III's reign, despite its brutal effectiveness, came to an abrupt end in 338 BCE. According to most Greek sources, particularly Diodorus Siculus, he was poisoned by his powerful eunuch chiliarch, Bagoas. An Egyptian eunuch had risen to prominence after playing a key role in the Egyptian campaign and had been granted significant authority, possibly over the eastern satrapies. His motives for assassinating the king are portrayed as stemming from Artaxerxes III's cruelty and harshness, or perhaps from Bagoas's fear of losing his own influential position. It is important to note, however, that at least one contemporary Babylonian cuneiform tablet suggests the king died of natural causes, casting some doubt on the poisoning narrative. Whether by poison or natural causes, Artaxerxes III's death plunged the empire back into chaos. Bagoas, wielding immense influence, acted as kingmaker. He allegedly murdered most of Artaxerxes III's sons, but spared the youngest, Arses, whom he placed on the throne as Artaxerxes IV, presumably intending him to be a puppet ruler. Arses' brief reign was fraught with instability. Revolts may have broken out again in Babylonia and Egypt, provinces resentful of Artaxerxes III's rule. Compounding these internal troubles, the external threat from Macedon intensified, as Philip II finalized his preparations for the invasion of Asia Minor, sending an advance force across the Hellespont in early 336 BCE. Arses reportedly attempted to assert his independence and rid himself of Bagoas's control, planning to poison the eunuch. Anticipating this move, Bagoas struck first, assassinating Arses and his children in the summer of 336 BCE. The fact that a court eunuch, however powerful, could seemingly orchestrate the deaths of two successive kings and manipulate the royal succession highlights the profound decay of Achaemenid central authority. Bagoas's deadly gambit, occurring precisely as the Macedonian threat materialized on the empire's doorstep, left Persia critically weakened and vulnerable at the moment of its greatest peril. It was a stark indication that the empire's internal structure was failing, regardless of the military successes achieved under Artaxerxes III. The assassination of Arses in 336 BCE marked the culmination of a period of intense court intrigue and instability. Into this vacuum stepped the last ruler of the Achaemenid dynasty, Darius III, who inherited an empire facing profound internal challenges, just as the most formidable external threat in its history emerged under Alexander the Great. Having eliminated Arses, the powerful eunuch Bagoas needed a new candidate for the throne. He selected a man named Artaxerxes, reportedly a distant relative of the royal Achaemenid line, descended from a brother of Artaxerxes II. Artaxerxes was not from the direct ruling branch that had held power since Darius I. His earlier career included distinguishing himself for bravery in single combat during Artaxerxes III's campaign against the Cadousians, which earned him the satrapy of Armenia, and later, possibly, the prestigious position overseeing the royal postal service. Bagoas likely chose him due to this reputation for valor, which would make him acceptable to the Persian nobility, combined with his royal lineage and perhaps a belief that this relative outsider would remain dependent on the eunuch's influence. Upon accession, Artaxerxes took the potent throne name Darius III. The Roman historian Justin also refers to him by the name Gaugamela, possibly a nickname or a third name used before his rise. Darius III quickly proved unwilling to be Bagoas's puppet. Discovering that the eunuch planned to poison him as well, Darius III turned the tables, compelling Bagoas to drink the fatal cup himself, thus eliminating the kingmaker who had placed him on the throne. This decisive action occurred around the autumn of 336 BCE, coinciding almost exactly with the assassination of Philip II of Macedon and the rise of Alexander the Great. Assessing Darius III's character is difficult due to the overwhelming bias in the surviving Greek sources, which invariably portray him as the foil to Alexander's brilliance. While acknowledged as tall and handsome and demonstrably brave in his earlier career, these sources often depict him as weak, indecisive, prone to panic, and ultimately cowardly in his confrontations with Alexander, particularly noting his flights from the battles of Issus and Gaugamela. However, some modern interpretations suggest his actions, such as fleeing battle, might reflect Persian royal tradition aimed at preserving the monarchy rather than personal cowardice. He inherited an empire in crisis and faced an opponent of exceptional military genius. Darius III ascended to the throne of an empire, but despite its vast size and resources, suffered from significant internal weaknesses accumulated over decades. Fragmentation and satrapal power. The trend towards decentralization seen under Artaxerxes II had been forcefully checked by Artaxerxes III, but the underlying structure remained. Satraps still wielded considerable regional power, and their loyalty to a new king from a collateral line, installed after a period of murderous intrigue, could not be guaranteed. The potential for disloyalty was later realized in the betrayal by Bessus. Corruption and court intrigue. The recent assassinations and Bagoas's manipulation demonstrated the vulnerability of the court to internal power struggles and corruption, which could paralyze effective governance. Overtaxation and the luxurious lifestyles of rulers were also cited as contributing factors to decline. Military capabilities. The Persian military remained capable of fielding immense armies drawn from across the diverse empire, incorporating infantry, formidable cavalry, chariots, and even elephants. They also possessed vast wealth to hire Greek mercenaries, who formed a crucial part of their heavy infantry. However, the command structure, the cohesion of such diverse forces, and the tactical flexibility of the traditional Persian formations proved inadequate against Alexander's highly disciplined, professional, combined arms Macedonian army. The reliance on mercenaries was expensive, and their loyalty could be questionable. While some argue the empire was not in terminal decline, citing the recent reconquest of Egypt and the vast wealth Alexander captured, the military system clearly struggled to adapt to the Macedonian challenge. Dynastic legitimacy. Darius III's ascent from a collateral branch, facilitated by a regicidal eunuch, may have weakened his claim to absolute authority in the eyes of some traditional Persian nobility compared to his predecessors. The state of the empire upon Darius III's accession remains a subject of debate. It was not necessarily a collapsing entity ripe for conquest. Artaxerxes III had recently demonstrated its capacity for recovery and military success. However, the deep-seated issues of satrapal power, court instability, questions surrounding Darius's own legitimacy, and a military system perhaps unprepared for Alexander's innovative tactics created significant fault lines. The empire possessed immense potential strength, but lacked the internal cohesion and perhaps the decisive leadership needed to withstand the unprecedented external pressure it was about to face. Alexander's genius lay partly in his ability to exploit these existing vulnerabilities. Simultaneous with the internal turmoil following Artaxerxes III's death, the kingdom of Macedon reached the zenith of its power. Philip II had transformed his kingdom from a peripheral territory into the dominant force in Greece. Through brilliant diplomacy and military reforms, including the creation of the professional Macedonian phalanx armed with the long sarissa spear, the development of the elite companion cavalry, and effective use of siege engines, Philip subdued neighbouring tribes and, culminating in the victory at Chaeronea in 338 BCE, imposed his authority over the fractious Greek city-states. Philip united most of Greece into the League of Corinth, which appointed him strategos, or commander-in-chief, for a long-planned invasion of the Persian Empire. This campaign was framed as a Panhellenic war of revenge for the Persian invasions of Greece in the previous century, a potent rallying cry. Philip had already sent an advance force of 10,000 men under his trusted general Parmenion into Asia Minor in early 336 BCE to secure a bridgehead. However, Philip was assassinated in October 336 BCE. His 20-year-old son, Alexander III, immediately succeeded him. Tutored by Aristotle and already experienced in battle, having commanded cavalry at Chaeronea, Alexander moved swiftly to consolidate his power. He eliminated potential rivals within Macedon and ruthlessly crushed nascent revolts in the Balkans and Greece, most notably destroying the city of Thebes in 335 BCE as a stark warning against defiance. The League of Corinth quickly reaffirmed his position as strategos. Alexander inherited his father's plan, army, and ambition. His motivations were manifold: fulfilling Philip's legacy, enacting the Panhellenic revenge, achieving personal glory, and securing the immense wealth of Persia needed to maintain his expensive army and pay off state debts. Armed with the knowledge of Persia's vulnerabilities, gleaned from sources like Xenophon's Anabasis, and facing a Persian Empire destabilized by the recent succession crises, Alexander was poised to launch his invasion in the spring of 334 BCE. In 334 BCE, Alexander the Great launched the invasion his father had planned, crossing the Hellespont into Asia Minor. This marked the beginning of a campaign that would, within 4 years, dismantle the Achaemenid Empire. The initial phase focused on securing the Western territories, neutralizing Persian naval power, and conquering the vital province of Egypt. Alexander crossed into Asia with a highly trained army of Macedonians and Greek allies, numbering between 35,000 and 47,000 men. After paying homage to the heroes of the Trojan War at Troy, a symbolic act linking his campaign to legendary Greek exploits, he advanced eastward. The local Persian satraps of Asia Minor, including Arcetes of Hellespontine Phrygia and Spithridates of Lydia and Ionia, hastily assembled their forces to confront the invaders. Their army included valuable contingents of Greek mercenaries, whose commander, Memnon of Rhodes, astutely advised a scorched earth strategy to deny supplies to Alexander. However, the Persian satraps, confident in their cavalry, rejected this cautious approach and chose to give battle immediately at the Granicus River. Darius III, the Great King, was not present at this initial engagement. The Persians deployed their cavalry along the steep eastern bank of the river, with their infantry, including the Greek mercenaries, positioned behind them. a tactical arrangement criticized by ancient historians. Alexander, assessing the situation and rejecting the more cautious advice of his senior general Parmenion to wait for a dawn crossing, ordered an immediate assault across the river. He personally led the charge of his elite companion cavalry from the right wing. A fierce cavalry engagement ensued in the riverbed and on the bank. Alexander himself was heavily involved in the fighting and was nearly killed, saved only by the timely intervention of Clytus the Black, who cut down a Persian attacker. Despite the difficult crossing and determined resistance, the superior discipline and tactics of the Macedonian cavalry eventually broke the Persian cavalry line. The Macedonian phalanx then advanced across the river and engaged the Persian infantry, particularly the Greek mercenaries who fought stubbornly. Surrounded and vastly outnumbered after the Persian cavalry fled, the mercenaries attempted to surrender, but were shown no mercy by Alexander, who regarded them as traitors to the Hellenic cause. Most were massacred, and the survivors, around 2,000, were sent back to Macedonia in chains to work in the mines. The Battle of the Granicus was a decisive victory for Alexander. It shattered the Persian forces in Asia Minor, resulting in the deaths of several satraps. Strategically, it secured a vital foothold for the Macedonians on Asian soil, opened up the western satrapies for conquest, and allowed Alexander to replenish his depleted supplies. The victory significantly boosted Macedonian morale, while demoralizing the Persians and encouraging many Greek cities in Ionia to defect from Persian rule and ally with Alexander. It also forced Darius III to recognize the gravity of the invasion and begin mobilizing the full resources of the empire. Alexander's bold, immediate attack demonstrated his characteristic confidence and aggressive leadership, while the brutal treatment of the Greek mercenaries served as a stark warning, a form of psychological warfare aimed at deterring other Greeks from serving the Persian king. Following Granicus, Alexander moved systematically to secure the western coast of Asia Minor. The Lydian capital Sardis, with its treasury, surrendered without a fight. He liberated Greek cities like Ephesus, installing democratic governments. Miletus resisted, encouraged by the presence of the Persian fleet, but was taken by assault. Alexander then faced a major challenge at Halicarnassus, the capital of Caria, strongly defended by Memnon of Rhodes. The siege was long and difficult, and while Alexander eventually captured the city, the citadel held out, and Memnon escaped by sea to continue organizing resistance. Alexander spent the winter campaigning through Lycia and Pamphylia, securing the southern coast before turning inland towards Phrygia. At Gordium, the ancient Phrygian capital, he famously encountered the Gordian knot, which legend claimed whoever could untie would rule Asia. Alexander is said to have solved the puzzle dramatically by cutting the knot with his sword. While Alexander was consolidating his hold on Asia Minor, Darius III mobilized the main imperial army, drawing troops from across the empire to personally confront the invader. Darius advanced westward, aiming to cut Alexander's lines of communication. Through a failure of intelligence on both sides, the two armies initially bypassed each other before Darius successfully positioned his massive force to Alexander's rear near the town of Issus, on a narrow coastal plain between the mountains and the sea. This location, however, severely limited the Persians' ability to deploy their numerical superiority effectively. Alexander, recovering from an illness in Tarsus, quickly marched south to meet the challenge. The battle was joined across the small Pinarus River. Alexander, once again commanding the right wing with his companion cavalry, led the charge across the river, shattering the Persian left flank composed mainly of Asiatic infantry. In the center, the Macedonian phalanx faced a much tougher fight against Darius's contingent of Greek mercenaries, who held their ground fiercely. Seeing his left collapsing, Alexander wheeled his victorious cavalry inwards, attacking the flank of the Greek mercenaries and driving towards Darius's position in the center. Under the direct pressure of Alexander's attack, the Persian center broke, and Darius III, fearing capture, turned his chariot and fled the battlefield. His flight precipitated a general rout of the Persian army. the Macedonians won another decisive victory. In the aftermath, the Macedonians captured the Persian camp, which included Darius's mother Sisygambis, his wife Statera I, his young son Ochus, and his daughters Statera II and Drypotis. Alexander famously treated the royal family with courtesy and respect, ensuring their safety and dignity. Parmenion was dispatched to capture Damascus, securing the Persian war chest and further baggage. The Battle of Issus was a shattering blow to Persian prestige and power. It confirmed Alexander's military dominance and Darius's personal failure as a commander. The capture of the royal family gave Alexander immense political leverage. Darius sent letters offering peace terms, including a huge ransom, cession of all lands west of the Euphrates, and marriage to his daughter. But Alexander arrogantly rejected these offers, demanding unconditional surrender and declaring himself the new lord of Asia. The victory opened the path for Alexander to advance south along the Mediterranean coast towards Phoenicia and Egypt. Alexander's next strategic objective was to neutralize the formidable Persian navy by capturing its main bases along the Phoenician coast. While other Phoenician cities like Byblos and Sidon submitted, the powerful island city of Tyre refused Alexander entry, confident in its formidable defenses. High walls built right up to the sea on an island nearly a kilometer offshore, and its strong navy. Faced with this challenge and lacking a comparable fleet initially, Alexander embarked on one of the most remarkable engineering feats of ancient warfare: the construction of a massive causeway, or mole, stretching from the mainland to the island. Built from stone rubble and timber, this causeway, perhaps 200 feet wide, was intended to allow Macedonian siege engines to reach the city walls. The construction took 7 grueling months, during which the Macedonians faced constant attacks from Tyrian ships and defenders on the walls, who used missiles and fire ships to disrupt the work. Alexander built tall mobile siege towers on the causeway for protection and counterfire. Crucially, Alexander eventually assembled a large fleet, commandeering ships from the already surrendered Phoenician cities and Cyprus. Well, this combined fleet, numbering over 200 vessels, he gained naval superiority, blockaded Tyre's 2 harbours, and defeated the Tyrian navy in battle. With the causeway completed and the sea controlled, the final assault began. Siege engines battered the walls from the causeway and from ships, eventually creating breaches. Macedonian troops stormed the city through the breaches and via ships entering the harbours. After fierce resistance, Tyre fell. Alexander, reportedly enraged by the lengthy resistance and the loss of his men, enacted brutal retribution. Thousands of Tyrian men of military age were killed. Some 2,000 were crucified along the shore, and the remaining population, around 30,000 women and children, was sold into slavery. Alexander then performed the sacrifice to Heracles that the Tyrians had denied him. The fall of Tyre was strategically vital. It eliminated Persia's most important naval base in the Mediterranean, effectively crippling its fleet. The siege showcased Alexander's unwavering determination, his innovative use of engineering as a weapon of war, and served as a terrifying example to other cities contemplating resistance. The unprecedented construction of the causeway, turning an island into a peninsula, fundamentally altered the strategic landscape and remains a testament to Alexander's resourcefulness in overcoming seemingly impossible obstacles. Alexander encountered the last major Persian stronghold, Gaza. The city, strategically located on an eminence controlling the route into Egypt, was commanded by a eunuch named Battis, who remained loyal to Darius III. Expecting a siege, Battis had provisioned the city well and garrisoned it with Arab mercenaries, confident in its high walls and position. Alexander, arriving after the arduous siege of Tyre, demanded surrender, which Battis refused. The siege proved difficult. Alexander employed the siege engines from Tyre and ordered the construction of large earthen mounds to reach the height of Gaza's walls, a task his engineers initially deemed impossible due to the sandy soil. The defenders mounted fierce resistance, launching sorties against the siege works. During one such counterattack, Alexander himself was wounded in the shoulder. After several weeks and 3 failed assaults, the Macedonians finally breached the walls and stormed the city. The Gazan defenders fought to the last man. As at Tyre, the aftermath was brutal. The male population was massacred, and the women and children were sold into slavery. Battis was captured alive, but refused to submit to Alexander. Enraged by his defiance, Alexander had him executed in a particularly cruel manner, reportedly by having ropes passed through his ankles and dragging him behind his chariot until dead, consciously imitating Achilles' treatment of Hector. The fall of Gaza removed the final obstacle on the road to Egypt. Alexander's entry into Egypt in late 332 BCE was markedly different from his experiences in Tyre and Gaza. The Egyptians, who harbored deep resentment towards Persian rule, particularly after the harsh reconquest and subsequent administration under Artaxerxes III, welcomed Alexander not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. The Persian satrap, Xerxes, wisely offered no resistance and surrendered the country. Alexander showed astute political sensitivity towards Egyptian customs and religion. He journeyed to Memphis, the ancient capital, where he made sacrifices to the Egyptian gods, including the sacred Apis bull, thereby winning the favor of the powerful priesthood. He was crowned with the traditional double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, accepting the title of Pharaoh. The Egyptian priests proclaimed him the son of the chief deity Amun. Seeking divine confirmation, Alexander undertook a difficult journey deep into the Libyan desert to visit the famed oracle of Amun at the Siwa oasis. There, the oracle's priest reportedly greeted him as the son of the god, further reinforcing Alexander's claim to divinity and legitimate rule over Egypt. During his stay in Egypt over the winter of 332 to 331 BCE, Alexander laid the foundations for one of his most enduring legacies, the city of Alexandria. Choosing a strategic site on the Mediterranean coast in the western Nile Delta, protected by the island of Pharos, he commissioned the architect Dinocrates to design a new city. Alexandria was destined to become the premier city of the Hellenistic world, a major center of trade, learning, and culture for centuries to come. Administratively, Alexander organized the governance of Egypt, appointing Egyptians to civil posts while keeping the military command firmly in Macedonian hands. By the spring of 331 BCE, having secured Egypt's vast resources, especially its grain, enhanced his own prestige and divine aura, and completed his control over the entire eastern Mediterranean seaboard, Alexander was ready to turn eastward again and confront Darius III for the final, decisive battle for the Persian Empire. Having secured the western territories and Egypt, Alexander the Great turned towards the heartland of the Persian Empire in 331 BCE. This phase of his campaign witnessed the decisive military engagement at Gaugamela, the capture of the imperial capitals, the symbolic destruction of Persepolis, and the tragic death of Darius III, marking the final collapse of Achaemenid rule. While Alexander was occupied in Egypt, Darius III worked tirelessly to assemble a new imperial army, drawing forces from the vast eastern satrapies, including Bactrians, Sogdians, Indians, Scythians, and others. This host, significantly larger than the army defeated at Issus, represented Persia's last major military hope. Ancient sources provide wildly varying figures for its size, ranging from 100,000 to over 250,000, but all agree it vastly outnumbered Alexander's army of approximately 47,000. Darius's force included formidable cavalry contingents, his elite infantry, including the Immortals and Greek mercenaries, scythed chariots, and even war elephants. Darius carefully selected the battlefield, a wide, flat plain near the village of Gaugamela, east of the Tigris River, near modern Mosul, Iraq, ideal terrain for deploying his superior numbers, especially his cavalry and chariots. He even had the ground leveled in front of his lines to maximize the chariots' effectiveness. Darius positioned himself in the traditional center of the Persian line, flanked by his best infantry and cavalry. The formidable Bactrian cavalry under Bessus held the left wing, while Mazaeus commanded the cavalry on the right. Alexander, after crossing the Euphrates and Tigris rivers unopposed, arrived near the Persian position. Rejecting Parmenian's suggestion of a night attack, Alexander opted for a decisive battle in daylight. He deployed his forces with his elite companion cavalry and hypaspists on the right wing under his personal command, the phalanx in the center, and Thessalian and allied Greek cavalry under Parmenion on the left. Aware of the danger of being outflanked, Alexander adopted an innovative formation, angling his flanks back and establishing a second line of infantry prepared to counter envelopment. The battle commenced with Alexander leading his right wing obliquely forward and to the right, seemingly moving away from the prepared ground and threatening to outflank the Persian left. Bessus responded by sending his Bactrian and Scythian cavalry to counter this move, engaging Alexander's vanguard cavalry. Meanwhile, Darius launched his scythed chariots against the Macedonian center. Alexander's light infantry effectively neutralized the chariot threat by targeting the drivers and horses, while the disciplined phalanx opened its ranks to let the few remaining chariots pass through harmlessly. As the cavalry engagement on Alexander's right drew more Persian units away from the center, a gap opened in the Persian line near Darius's position. Alexander seized the critical moment, leading his companion cavalry in a wedge formation, followed by the hypaspists and part of the phalanx, charging directly into the gap towards Darius. The Persian center crumbled under this concentrated assault. Once again, as at Issus, Darius III lost his nerve, turned his chariot and fled the battlefield. His flight signaled defeat to his army, leading to a widespread collapse of morale and a general rout. While Alexander initially pursued Darius, he was forced to turn back to assist his left wing under Parmenio, which was under heavy pressure from Mazaeus's cavalry. Some Persian and Indian cavalry had even broken through a gap in the Macedonian line and reached the camp, but were eventually repulsed by the second line and Alexander's returning forces. Gaugamela was Alexander's tactical masterpiece and a catastrophic defeat for the Achaemenid Empire. Persian losses were immense, while Macedonian casualties were comparatively light. The battle effectively destroyed the last major Persian field army and irrevocably sealed the fate of the empire. Darius fled eastward, first to Ecbatana and later towards Bactria, his authority shattered. Alexander was now the undisputed master of the Persian heartland and was proclaimed king of Asia. Following Gaugamela, Alexander marched south to secure the great cities of Mesopotamia and Persia. Babylon, one of the empire's major administrative centers and richest cities, surrendered without a fight in late October 331 BCE. The Persian satrap Mazaeus, who had commanded the Persian right wing at Gaugamela, handed over the city and its treasury. Alexander entered Babylon in triumph, welcomed by the populace. Showing his characteristic respect for local traditions, he ordered the rebuilding of temples destroyed by Xerxes, particularly the Great Temple of Marduk, and confirmed Mazaeus in his position as satrap, albeit with a Macedonian military commander alongside him. From Babylon, Alexander proceeded to Susa, another of the Achaemenid administrative capitals, arriving in December 331 BCE. Susa also surrendered peacefully, yielded by its governor Abolaites. Here, Alexander captured an immense treasure, estimated at 50,000 talents of gold and silver, which provided crucial funding for his campaigns and allowed him to send significant sums back to Macedon. He left Darius's captured family comfortably settled in Susa. Alexander's next objective was Persepolis, the ceremonial and dynastic heart of the Achaemenid Empire, located in Persis proper. The route from Susa led through the Zagros Mountains. After subduing the resistant Oxy mountain tribes, Alexander faced his last significant military obstacle at the Persian, a narrow mountain pass leading into Persis in January 330 BCE. The pass was defended by the determined Persian satrap Ariobarzanes, with a smaller but well-positioned force. Artaxerxes successfully ambushed Alexander's vanguard, using the terrain to inflict heavy casualties and holding the Macedonians at bay for about a month. This engagement, sometimes compared to a Persian Thermopylae, was a serious challenge. Alexander eventually overcame the defense by finding a mountain path, guided perhaps by local shepherds or prisoners, that allowed him to outflank Artaxerxes' position. Artaxerxes was defeated and killed, either in the pass or shortly afterward near Persepolis. With the Persian gates forced, Alexander arrived at Persepolis. The city, representing the pinnacle of Achaemenid imperial grandeur and symbolism, was surrendered by its governor, Tiridates. Alexander seized the royal treasury located there, reportedly the richest in the world, containing an estimated 120,000 to 135,000 talents, an astronomical sum. According to Diodorus, Alexander described Persepolis as the worst enemy among the cities of Asia, and gave it over to his soldiers to plunder. This looting likely involved significant violence and destruction. After occupying the city for several months, Alexander ordered or permitted the destruction by fire of the magnificent palace complex on the Persepolis terrace in the spring of 330 BCE. The exact reasons for this infamous act remain debated. Regardless of the precise trigger, the burning of Persepolis resulted in the destruction of irreplaceable architectural masterpieces, sculptures, and likely vast archives of administrative records and religious texts inscribed on perishable materials. It was a profound cultural loss. Alexander himself is said to have regretted the decision soon after, recognizing the senselessness of destroying what was now his own property. The act, however, served as a dramatic and brutal symbol of the Achaemenid Empire's end. The specific targeting of Xerxes' palace strongly suggests that, even if fueled by wine, the underlying motive was deeply rooted in the historical narrative of Greco-Persian conflict and Alexander's role as the avenger of Greece. After securing Persepolis, Alexander resumed his pursuit of Darius III, marching north towards Ecbatana in Media, where Darius had initially fled. Finding Darius had already moved further east, hoping to rally support and raise a new army in the eastern satrapies like Bactria. Alexander pressed on relentlessly. Darius's authority, however, was collapsing. His repeated defeats and flights had eroded the loyalty of his remaining followers. As Alexander's forces drew closer, a conspiracy formed among Darius's own commanders and relatives. Led by Bessus, the satrap of Bactria and a kinsman of Darius, along with Anabasis and Barsaentes, the conspirators arrested Darius, placing him in chains, possibly intending to use him as a bargaining chip, or to replace him with Bessus. Bessus subsequently declared himself the new Great King, adopting the throne name Artaxerxes V. Alexander, hearing of Darius's capture, pushed his troops even harder in a forced march. As the Macedonian vanguard neared the conspirators' location in July 330 BCE, Bessus and his companions realized they could not escape with their prisoner. They stabbed Darius multiple times, leaving him mortally wounded in a wagon, and fled eastward. Alexander arrived shortly after to find the last Achaemenid king either dead or dying. Accounts describe Alexander showing respect and sorrow, reportedly covering Darius's body with his own cloak. He ordered that Darius's body be treated with honor, embalmed and sent back to Persepolis for a royal burial in the Achaemenid tombs, fitting for a king. The death of Darius III marked the definitive end of the Achaemenid dynasty, which had ruled for over 2 centuries. Alexander's respectful treatment of his fallen rival, and his subsequent vow to hunt down and punish Bessus as a regicide and usurper, were politically astute moves. By positioning himself as Darius's avenger and rightful successor, rather than merely a foreign conqueror, Alexander aimed to win the allegiance of the Persian nobility and facilitate the consolidation of his own rule over the vast empire. The death of Darius III in 330 BCE extinguished the Achaemenid dynasty, but it did not erase the profound impact the Persian Empire had on the ancient world. Alexander the Great, now the undisputed master of its territories, embarked on policies aimed at integrating his Macedonian and Greek followers with the conquered peoples, particularly the Persians. Though his own empire proved ephemeral, fragmenting soon after his death, the administrative, cultural, and political legacy of the Achaemenids endured, influencing successor states and later empires for centuries. Having defeated Darius and positioned himself as his avenger, Alexander sought to legitimize his rule over the former Persian lands. He relentlessly pursued the regicide Bessus, who had proclaimed himself Artaxerxes V, eventually capturing and executing him for treason against Darius. This act reinforced Alexander's claim as the rightful successor to the Achaemenid throne. To further solidify his position and bridge the gap between conquerors and conquered, Alexander adopted several policies aimed at fusion and integration. Adoption of Persian customs. He began incorporating elements of Persian royal attire and court ceremony into his own practices. This included attempting to introduce the Persian custom of proskynesis, ritual prostration before the king, a practice deeply offensive to Greek notions of freedom and equality, which met with strong resistance from his Macedonian officers and was ultimately abandoned for Greeks and Macedonians. Appointment of Persians. Alexander retained or appointed Persians to important administrative positions, including satrapies, working alongside Macedonian officials. This pragmatic approach utilized existing administrative structures and personnel, policy of fusion and marriage alliances. Alexander actively encouraged the blending of Greek and Persian cultures. The most dramatic expression of this policy was the mass Susa weddings in 324 BCE. Alexander himself married Statira II, the eldest daughter of Darius III, and possibly also Parysatis II, the youngest daughter of Artaxerxes III, thereby directly linking himself to the two most recent branches of the Achaemenid royal family. Simultaneously, he arranged for around 80 to 90 of his senior Macedonian officers and thousands of his soldiers to marry Persian noblewomen, providing dowries for them all. This policy aimed to create a new, unified Greco-Persian ruling class for his empire. Military integration. To address manpower shortages and foster unity, Alexander incorporated Persian soldiers into the ranks of his army, even training some units in Macedonian tactics and weaponry. Alexander's fusion policies were likely driven by a mix of pragmatism. The need to govern a vast, diverse empire effectively required incorporating local elites and manpower, and perhaps a genuine, if ambitious, vision of a unified Hellenistic world where Greek and Eastern cultures could coexist and blend. However, these policies faced significant resistance from many of his Macedonian veterans, who resented the adoption of barbarian customs and the elevation of Persians to positions of authority, viewing it as a betrayal of their Macedonian identity and conquest. Most of the Susa marriages arranged for his officers were dissolved shortly after Alexander's death, indicating the policy's lack of deep acceptance among the Macedonian elite. Alexander the Great's death in 323 BCE at age 32, without a clear heir, led to the immediate fragmentation of his vast empire. His generals, known as the Diadochi, fought for control in decades of conflict called the Wars of the Diadochi. By the early 3rd century BCE, particularly after the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BCE, the empire had irrevocably split into several Hellenistic kingdoms. The most notable were the Ptolemaic Kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in Asia, and the Antigonid Kingdom in Macedonia. These kingdoms shaped the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East for 2 centuries, continuing the spread of Hellenistic culture. The Achaemenid Empire, despite its eventual fall, left a profound and lasting legacy on the theory and practice of governance that extended far beyond its borders and influenced subsequent world empires. Its key contributions included centralized bureaucratic administration. The Achaemenids created the first truly successful model for administering a vast, multi-ethnic empire through a centralized, hierarchical bureaucracy. The satrapy system, with its checks and balances, provided a framework for regional governance under central authority that was adapted by later empires, including the Romans and the Islamic caliphates. The Abbasid Caliphate, in particular, heavily borrowed from Sasanian and thus ultimately Achaemenid administrative practices, employing Persian bureaucrats and adopting Persian court protocols. The Achaemenid investment in large-scale infrastructure, particularly the royal road network and the efficient Chapar-Khaneh postal system, demonstrated how physical connections and rapid communication could bind together a sprawling empire. This emphasis on infrastructure as a tool of governance and integration served as a precedent for later empires, most notably the Romans with their extensive road system and cursus publicus. Multicultural governance. Perhaps the most enduring legacy was the Achaemenid model of multiculturalism and tolerance. By generally respecting the languages, religions, and customs of conquered peoples, the Achaemenids fostered a degree of loyalty and stability across their diverse domains. A stark contrast to the often brutal assimilationist policies of earlier empires like Assyria. This approach provided a template for managing diversity that influenced subsequent multi-ethnic empires, including elements of Roman provincial administration and the policies of early Islamic caliphates towards non-Muslim subjects, people of the book. The Achaemenid Empire established the blueprint for large-scale imperial administration, demonstrating how vast territories and diverse populations could be effectively governed through organized bureaucracy, strategic infrastructure, and a degree of cultural accommodation. Its innovations and practices were transmitted, adapted, and emulated by Hellenistic kingdoms, the Roman Empire, the Islamic caliphates, and others, profoundly shaping the course of political and administrative history across Eurasia for millennia. Thanks for sticking with us to the end. We hope you found this both informative and enjoyable. We truly appreciate you being here. See you next time!